Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, fromtheshadowspodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar at YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. We also have a Patreon page. It can be found at www.patreon.com/From the Shadows. You can receive books, stickers, coffee mugs, and special content just for our Patreon subscribers. Check it out for yourself and see what packages that we have to offer. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started.
So Howler, you know that, well, and some of our loyal listeners know that Todd and I were down at the Outer Banks and on vacation. And the really cool thing about this house we were in is they had one of those old arcade games. Well, I shouldn't say it was old. It's a new arcade game, but it was one of those with like 60 games, all from the early 1980s. You know, Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Millipede,
right,
Zaxxon. I mean, I used to, I didn't have very much money. You know, if I got sent with $5 and quarters to an arcade, that was like $1 million.
What's a dollar?
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't know until this last week down there in the Outer Banks after the first section of Zaxxon, what happened. Like, I'd never made it past that. I always died. You know, I'd wasted $2 and quarters before I realized I was no good at it.
Hey, so you're better at 50 than you were at 15?
Maybe this wasn't the pressure of knowing that quarter is all was the difference. You know, knowing that I could be a little looser flying that fake space shuttle. You know?
We had a Dave's Pool Hall at the time in Taos, Missouri. We had a machine that was a dime machine. Those kids were so poor the machines didn't even take quarters. They took dimes.
Oh man, what was the game?
It was this big. Hey, you know what's funny is it paid off too.
So it's like one of those old like gambling. They didn't call them gambling, whatever they.
It was the little sign said for amusement only or something. Now, not to get off topic, let me finish. So it had a big board full of numbers and pinballs, and depending on almost like bingo. So you would get 5 balls for a dime, and if you connected, like 3-4 numbers in a row, or 10, 20, 30 or something. There's combinations that got you points, and then it depending on how your score is, you got longer play, and once you got over X amount of dollars, it paid off. And I don't remember what it paid. It was something like back in them days, if you got $20 from a machine to pay off, you made something. You know what I mean?
Those were the machines that they used to set up where you could win a cigarette, or you want a pack of gum or something like that.
Right. But but unfortunately, not unfortunately, but really, and I didn't realize it until later in life, when I got to be a state trooper, and I realized that they had a whole division called gaming that did the Cherry Masters and all these games that they always had this little paper sign that said amusement only. And I used to think, man, what else would it be? Well, it was because if you were local, if you were a local guy and they knew who you were, the bartender would pay you off depending on how
Yeah.
much you want. I mean, you know how it works.
Yeah, it's
And
gambling.
now,
Yeah.
apparently now, uh, the state's got some kind of loophole for them all to do it now, and they just tax them. So every machine, every station you go into up here's got some kind of a machine that pays off. Yeah, speaking of pinball wizards, I was going to talk about Bruce, and Bruce was a pinball wizard, and I don't really understand how he, there's a saying that says, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king," right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
yeah, so if you're like me, I stayed on the farm all the time. You know what I mean? Unless I got a ride to town or something and got dropped off at my grandma's or something, I was stuck out on the farm. You know, so I didn't have gravel road, 3 channels of TV, no air
That's how.
conditioning,
Hey, that's how I grew up. I lived
no
farther.
air
I
conditioning.
lived
Hey,
so far
no,
away from
no,
everybody. I mean, come
no
on.
air conditioning. I mean, so when I'd get to town or get together with Bruce, I mean, Bruce was worldly. Like he'd been to town 20 times. His grandma lived in town like mine, but he got to actually do stuff. And you remember when, what was it? The Who? Was that Pinball Wizard?
Oh yeah, yeah, about the blind, deaf, and
Yeah, yeah. So,
yeah,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So he had that cassette. I don't think it was 8-track. I'm pretty sure it was cassette. And he had a real leather jacket, not no fake one. I mean, he had uh, a real leather jacket, and you would do. I don't know what all you'd do. I could tell Bruce stories till I'm blue in the face. But my little brother wanted me, the one that told me this week that all those machines paid out in all the truck stops and everything. He wanted me to tell this Bruce story uh, that me and him was talking about. Bruce's old man had this body shop, which is the reason why he always had these cars. And I could do. His dad was like a biker version of. You ever watch that Counting Cars on
oh yeah, the count. Yeah,
the
yeah.
Count? Yeah, I mean, imagine like a sort of mean Count. You know what I mean? Like his old man had been
Okay.
around. I mean, the Count on that show seems to be a hell of a nice guy, right?
Oh, of
His
course.
Yeah,
How
Bruce's
could
old
yeah.
man had, I guess the penitentiary done that to him or the biker gang or something, but his old man had a little bit of mean streak, but he always made sure his kids, uh, you know, had a car to drive because then people would come in and he'd go to sell it and he go, "Is it a reliable car?" "Well, my son or my daughter drives to school every day." And, he never told him, he just rebuilt it last week. But anyhow, he had this old boy that worked in the shop there, whose last name was Strope. My little brother, we got talking about him. He said, "Whatever happened to him?" I said, "I don't know." But I said, my brother said, "You think he's still racing?" And I don't know. And these old boys had worked for Tom, and then some of his people, he always had cash money. And people would, if they needed money, they'd go ask Tom. If you worked for him, or if you was around him, or if you was one of his friends or whatever, you could always count on him loaning you money or giving you money. What he really tried to do was buy something from you, so he didn't have to worry about you stiffing him, right?
Yeah, you paying it back. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So Strope needed some money to go to the races, or he went from B modifieds to wing sprints, which take just a tremendous amount of money. Sprint cars are just a tremendous amount of money. And he cut this deal with Tom. He had a big block Chevrolet, and I don't remember if it was a 396. My brother seemed to think it was a 454, but I think it was 396 because it had a little more allure to it. And Tom got this 63 or 4. I think it was a Bel Air because I had an Impala. I had a 65 Impala, and I'm pretty sure it had 2 taillights, which would have made it a Bel Air, where the Impala had 3. He had this two-tone black and patina Bel Air that was 4-door, and Tom, that's Bruce's dad, wanted what was called a sleeper car. He wanted this hot rod. Now, but nowadays they do all kinds of rat rods, and I mean, I'm sure you've been to car shows lately. or if you've been, there's car show down here at the lake where I live a couple times a month in the summertime. But a lot of these guys don't even paint them up anymore, right? They what's called rat rod. But back in
Yeah,
the
they
days,
want them to look original.
yeah, like the 50s or the 60s or what.
Yeah.
So back in the 80s, people wanted them to look nice. But Tom, he paid Strope for this big block Chevy, and he wanted it installed in this old Bel Air 4-door that still had the silver hubcaps with the red bow tie, and he took them off, threw them in the trunk. And what he wanted was to drive down the boulevard, which is US Business 50, the old highway in the main drag. And when kids wanted to hot rod or kids wanted to race or whatever, he wanted to just blow the doors off of them. Right?
What is this Did you grow up in
It was
American
like
Graffiti?
American Graffiti, because I have had these. It's kind of funny when you get to be 50 and get a little money, you buy a bunch of shit that you don't need because you couldn't afford it when you were 19, right? My brother tells me that's why the square body trucks are worth so much money now. Those 85, 86 Chevys, have you seen any of them for sale that they want all this money?
Yeah.
And that's because people that are our age that's got money remember dad or grandpa having one of them or learned how to drive in one of them or whatever, and that's what's driving the price of those things up. Kind of like it's our 57 Chevy, right? Remember when you were in high school and everybody wanted 57 Chevy? Because that's when you're old man, your parents or whatever. So Tom's got this big block Bel Air, and Bruce calls me at, this is pre-cell phone day, so you got to call on a landline, walk over to the wall and pick up a corded phone, answer it, and he says, "Hey, I'm driving this big block Chevy to school tomorrow. You want to ride with me?" And I said, "Yeah." Uneventful going to school. But coming home, at that time, and I'm sure people across America know what I'm talking about, you had to try to beat the buses out of the parking lot, right?
Of course, you don't want to be behind the bus.
And you're behind them in our case, going from Wardsville to Taos, you're behind them for probably 8 miles, which at that time we thought was a long way.
Yeah, and if you're behind the last bus,
yes,
it's the one making all the stops away from the
That's
school.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And now we're getting yelled at. Bruce always got yelled at. Now I went to a state-supported Catholic school, and me and Bruce weren't Catholic, so it was in some days it was us against them, and they're yelling at Bruce, what a piece of junk car this is, and now they wouldn't never say 2 words to him in the hallway where he could reach them, because he'd smack them just to do it, right?
Well, the leather jacket, you just automatically make me think he's the Fonz. He's the Fonz of where you grew up.
Let me tell you something. He would have. Not only did he have a leather jacket, he had a chain on his wallet since he was in the 5th or 6th grade, and the big silver ring on the side of his boot. And this is more story than I meant to tell, but I'm just going to tell it because there might be some 1%ers in the audience. I don't know. His uncle, his dad's brother, big brother, was a no kidding biker with the Galloping Goose. You probably never heard of the Galloping Goose, have you?
I think I've heard you mention the Galloping.
Well, I mean, it's a sister club to the Hell's Angels. This Bruce's uncle was a no kidding biker. I mean, tough guy. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he met his demise down here on, I think, Highway D. I'd have to show you over in Marys County, where an opposing traffic, he was driving down the highway. There's a big straight stretch about 1.5 miles long, and he was known to run his bike down through there as fast as it would go, right, through this grass farm on both sides of the road. And with one of those 4-board fancy looking painted wood fences, you know how the horse or cattle people, this had to be cattle people. So it's the facade is the 4-board fence, and behind it is real wire to keep the cows in. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And somebody shot him in the face with a load of 7.5s or 8s, which is just a kind of a light target load, shotgun load. So the load of 7.5s in the face didn't kill him, but running that Harley Davidson down through the 4-board barbed wire backed fence killed him dead. So,
oh my God.
So I only throw that in there. So Bruce Bruce wanted to be a biker and a tough guy ever since he could walk, right? I mean, ever since, because we were about 7 or 8, 9, 10, 7, 8. Bruce was probably 7 or 8 when his uncle got killed, and that was kind of his idol. So he aspired to be a biker, right? And even though he's a pretty nice guy, he's got a mean streak. You know what I mean? It could rear its ugly head. So that was a long way to get back to the buses. So these kids would yell from the bus or make little signs or something from the bus, but they wouldn't dare do it to his face, right? So for 8 miles, we're behind this bus full of kids throwing spitballs out and boogers or whatever, flipping us off. You know how some kids are, right? So the bus gets stopped at this subdivision called Dove Lake. There's 25, 30 houses in there, probably more than that. But there's about 15 or 18 kids that get off the bus. And, back in them days, that was before the arm went out in front and kept you from getting run over or whatever. And kids would walk behind the bus, in front of the bus, and they had bags, and they'd fight.
Oh, yeah.
So the bus guy pulls in the arm, and there's 15, 18 kids within 100 feet of this bus still, and waves, because there's us and there's 4, 5, 6 cars, high school cars behind us. All the cars come out of high school. Bus driver waves us around, and Bruce, as we get up next to the bus, he's got his left foot on the brake and his right foot on the gas, and he gives that big block just enough gas to get the back tire burning off, and then it looks like we're at I don't even know the Daytona Speed Week at Daytona for Drag Week or something. You know what I mean? That car's little single track. Your car guys know what I'm talking about. Single track rear end where it's just your right rear tire spinning. It's only about 7.5 inches wide. It's an old bias ply white wall tire that this old woman had on the car, and it just turns into this black blue smoke and stinks. And these kids are all looking around, and the more they're freaking out about this nasty smoke blowing across them, the more gas Bruce gives it, right? and nowadays these diesel guys run diesels and stuff, but back then it was just tire smoke. And about, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds into this, maybe a minute, kaboom, pow, pow, boom, the tire come apart. So he immediately, without even missing a beat, he takes his foot off the brake, and we take off. And now we go from just spinning out, barely moving, to going, I don't know, 55, 60, 65 mile an hour on 3 tires and a rim. And that tire's coming apart. Anybody's heard a tire come apart? About every third round, it's hitting part of the fender, and it's coming apart. It's spraying rubber, and those truckers call them alligators when they come apart on the highway. Did you know that? Yeah, so they're leaving these little baby alligators out there on the highway. I look over at him and said, "Dude, aren't you going to stop and fix it?" And he goes, "Not where they can see me." And we run on 3 tires and a rim for about 2.5, 3 miles till we got down the road and could turn to where people wouldn't know us. We were changing the tire.
Oh.
That's the story my brother wanted me to tell, because he's laughing so hard he wanted me to call Bruce right there and talk about it.
I wonder what Bruce's version of that story is.
Oh, whatever I say he'd agree with, because I'm a better storyteller than him. You know what I mean?
I wonder what those kids standing there would have to say.
You know what? Maybe we ought to have him if we got enough listener requests, I'll get him. I'll get him on the podcast one day.
You get Bruce to come on?
I'll get him come on with us one day. I'll get him come on us one day. And the problem is, this is the problem. We had to do a Patreon or something, because he'll cuss. He'd say some crazy stuff that some of these PG viewers might not want to hear.
Well, I think people have heard enough Bruce stories. I think there's probably a little bit of demand for some Bruce.
Maybe. See, you find out for me. And you find out for me.
We might have to make a Bruce T-shirt.
Maybe. They called me Bruce. Hey, that was the movie. Remember that movie? They called me Bruce.
They called me. That was a movie. Wasn't that a Rick Springfield song?
No.
My name isn't Bruce. That was a Rick Springfield song.
Well, there was a movie called They Called Me Bruce, and it was a poor man's kung fu.
Oh, about Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking of the Rick Springfield song where he's telling the lady, "Don't call me. My name's not Bruce," or the
I don't
person thinks he's Rick or Bruce Springsteen, not Rick Springfield. You know, I
really.
mean,
I didn't know that. Well,
well, hey, I'm a big Rick Springfield guy. You
hey,
know,
nothing like Jesse's girl, is there?
that's right, baby. That's right.
Yeah. Yay. Next week I'll talk about what they did to that big block when the car fell apart.
Oh,
Because there's a big block part two. You know, there's a big block
well,
part two.
then I guess that's where we'll end it. We'll leave
Yeah,
everybody
we
guessing.
got to. That's right. Keep
What?
them wanting more. I think that's what the old Blue Eyes used to say, right? When Sinatra always said, "Leave them for more," or is that Jackie Gleason? One or the other.
I thought that was George Costanza in the
One
one
of the
song.
same. One and the same.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.